In the summer of 79 AD, on an ordinary August morning, 20,000 people woke up in a city on the Bay of Naples and began their day. They fed their animals. They opened their shops. They argued about politics and gossiped about their neighbors and went to the baths and ate their breakfast standing at a street counter, the way people in this city always ate breakfast. Standing up at the counter fast, because there was always somewhere to be. They had no idea, none, that by nightfall, their city would be gone. Not burned, not flooded, not invaded. Simply covered. Pressed beneath 4 to 6 meters of volcanic ash and pumice, preserved mid-gesture, mid-meal, mid-argument, mid-life, in a catastrophe so total and so sudden that it functioned less like a disaster and more like a pause button. The city of Pompeii stopped on August 24th, 79 AD, at approximately 1 in the afternoon, and not found again, not properly, not as the extraordinary thing it is, until a farmer was digging a well, more than 1600 years later, and his shovel hit something that was not soil. Tonight we go back into the city that time forgot to finish. Fact 1. Pompeii was not a remote, forgotten outpost of the Roman Empire. It was a prosperous, bustling, deeply ordinary Roman city of approximately 11,000 permanent residents, though its population swelled considerably on market days and during festivals. It sat at the mouth of the Sarno River on the Bay of Naples, in a region the Romans called Campania Felix, Happy Campania, because of its exceptional fertility. The volcanic soil of the region, enriched by millennia of minor eruptions from the volcano that dominated the landscape to the north, was among the most productive agricultural land in the ancient world. The wine produced in the vineyards around Pompeii was exported across the Roman Empire. The city had a forum, a temple to Jupiter, a large theater, 2 amphitheaters, multiple bath complexes, a market, bakeries, taverns, brothels, food stalls, workshops, the full infrastructure of a Roman city, in miniature, well preserved in life before it was preserved in death. Fact 2. Vesuvius had not erupted in living memory, or in any memory that the people of Pompeii carried. The volcano had been dormant for hundreds, possibly thousands, of years before 79 AD, so dormant that its slopes were densely cultivated and settled. Vineyards covered much of the mountain. Wealthy Romans had built villas on its flanks, attracted by the extraordinary views of the bay and the excellent soil. The Romans knew, abstractly, that Vesuvius was a volcano. The geographer Strabo, writing a few decades before the eruption, noted that the summit of Vesuvius appeared to have been consumed by ancient fire. But the mountain was dormant. It had been dormant for so long that the practical knowledge of its danger, the kind of knowledge that is embedded in culture, in folklore, in the things grandparents tell grandchildren, was simply gone. Nobody warned the people of Pompeii. Not because nobody cared, because nobody knew. The mountain had been quiet for too long. Fact 3. There were warnings before the eruption. They simply were not understood as warnings. In the 17 years before 79 AD, the region experienced a significant earthquake. In 62 AD, a major seismic event that damaged Pompeii and the surrounding towns substantially. The rebuilding was still ongoing in 79 AD. Some of Pompeii's temples and public buildings were in the process of repair when the eruption came. In the days and weeks immediately preceding the eruption, there were also smaller earthquakes, more frequent than usual, unsettling but not dramatic. And the springs and wells that supplied the city and the surrounding farms with water had been drying up. Not all at once, gradually, inexplicably. The water table was changing because the geological pressure building beneath the surface was altering the underground hydrology. These were signs, retrospectively clear, prospectively invisible, because nobody had a framework for reading them. Nobody had been through this before. Nobody's parents had. Nobody's grandparents had. The memory of the mountain's danger had been erased by too many generations of silence. The springs drying up. The small earthquakes becoming more frequent. The builders still repairing the temples from 62 AD. Nobody reading the signs. Because nobody had the framework. Because the silence had lasted too long. This is how catastrophes begin. Not with a single dramatic warning, but with signs that only make sense in retrospect. After. Fact 4. The eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD was witnessed and described by a man named Pliny the Younger. He was 17 years old at the time. He was staying with his uncle, Pliny the Elder, the famous naturalist and commander of the Roman naval fleet at Misenum, at a villa across the bay from Vesuvius. His uncle died in the eruption, attempting to rescue survivors from the coast near Pompeii. Pliny the Younger survived, and approximately 25 years later, responding to a request from the historian Tacitus for an account of his uncle's death, he wrote 2 letters describing what he had seen. Those 2 letters are the only eyewitness account of a major volcanic eruption that survived from the ancient world. They describe, with extraordinary precision and detail, the sequence of events. The column of smoke and ash rising from the mountain in the shape of a pine tree. The darkening of the sky until it was darker than the darkest night. The shower of pumice and ash that fell across the bay. The strange, low, continuous rumbling of the ground. And the panic of the people around him, many of whom believed the world was ending. Fact 5. The eruption of Vesuvius was not primarily a flow of lava. This is one of the most common misconceptions. Lava, molten rock flowing slowly down the mountain slopes, would have given people time to evacuate. What killed most of the people of Pompeii was something different. The eruption produced, over the course of approximately 18 to 20 hours, an enormous column of ash, pumice, and superheated gas rising to approximately 32 kilometers in height. For the first hours of the eruption, this column was mostly falling ash and pumice, heavy but survivable for those who could move. Many people did evacuate during this phase. The final phase, the collapse of the eruption column, produced something called a pyroclastic surge, a wave of superheated gas and fine ash, moving at approximately 500 kilometers per hour, at temperatures somewhere between 200–700 degrees Celsius, rolling down the mountain's flanks and across the surrounding landscape. It arrived at Pompeii in seconds. Everyone still in the city died within moments. Not slowly. Not from suffocation by ash. From the heat. Instantly. Fact 6. Pompeii's rediscovery began not with organized archaeology but with a hole in the ground. In 1594, an architect named Domenico Fontana was digging a channel to redirect the river Sarno for a new water supply project when his workers encountered ancient walls and inscriptions. The discovery was noted, and largely ignored, because nobody yet understood what was buried there. The first recognition that a city lay beneath the fields came in 1748, when a farmer digging a well struck the top of a buried wall. Further investigation revealed painted frescoes, still bright beneath the accumulated centuries. The formal excavation of Pompeii, under the direction of the Spanish military engineer Roque Joaquín de Alcubierre, working for the Bourbon King of Naples, began in the same year. And the world that had been pressing toward the eruption since the morning of August 24, 79 AD, began piece by piece to come back. Fact 7. The excavation of Pompeii in the 18th century was conducted with what can only be described as enthusiastic disregard for archaeological method. Because archaeological method barely existed. Workers dug rapidly, extracting whatever was beautiful or valuable. Paintings, mosaics, bronze statues, gold jewelry, and discarding or covering whatever was not. The site was treated primarily as a source of royal entertainment and artistic treasures. King Charles III of Naples, who sponsored the excavations, used the finds to furnish and decorate his palaces. Important contexts: the spatial relationships between objects, the positions in which things were found, the stratigraphy that would allow precise dating, were routinely destroyed in the extraction process. What was found was extraordinary. What was lost in the finding, the contextual information that careful excavation would have preserved, was irretrievable. The early excavations of Pompeii are a salutary lesson in the difference between treasure hunting and archaeology. They found wonderful things and destroyed the full record in the process of finding them. Fact 8. The casts of Pompeii's victims are among the most famous and most haunting images in archaeology. They were not discovered until 1863, when the archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli developed the technique that produced them. Fiorelli noticed that the hardened ash surrounding some of the buried victims had preserved the shape of the body. A void, a human-shaped hole in the compacted volcanic material. He began injecting liquid plaster into these voids. When the plaster set and the surrounding ash was carefully removed, what emerged was not a skeleton. It was a cast, a three-dimensional record of the body at the moment of death. The position, the clothing, in fabric so fine that its texture was preserved in the plaster. The face, a man covering his mouth with his cloak, a family huddled together, a dog still on its lead, contorted in the last moments, people in the postures of their final seconds, preserved, not as bones, as shapes, as the space they occupied, as the specific, individual, unrepeatable form of a life interrupted. The casts, still in the position they were in, when the world stopped, the man with his cloak over his mouth, the family together, the dog, all of them stopped, mid-gesture, in a moment that became permanent, because the earth decided to keep it, the way the earth keeps everything it receives, with complete fidelity, without judgment. The city they were living in is still there, under the earth, giving up its pieces, slowly, one excavation at a time. It is not finished. The city is not fully excavated. There is still more, under the ground, patient as everything buried is patient, as the dark is patient, as the night is patient, right now, holding what it holds, until it is ready to give it back. Sleep. Walk into Pompeii today and you walk into a city that is simultaneously 2,000 years old and 2,000 years young. Young because so much of it was never subjected to the ordinary wearing away that time applies to everything left above ground. The paint on the walls, the ruts in the paving stones cut by cartwheels over decades of use, the graffiti scratched into plaster by hands that had something to say and a sharp stone to say it with, the loaves of bread in the baker's oven, the dates and figs and walnuts still in their bowls in the thermopolium, the Roman fast food counter, waiting for customers who were not coming back. Walking through Pompeii is the closest thing available to time travel. Not because the city is spectacular, because it is ordinary, because what was preserved was not the ceremonial or the monumental. It was the daily, the breakfast, the shopping list, the election notice, the argument chalked on a wall, the stuff of life, saved by catastrophe. Fact 9. Pompeii had approximately 80 thermopolia, fast food counters embedded in the walls of buildings along the city's streets. A thermopolium was typically a counter of masonry, faced with marble, with large ceramic jars, dolia, sunk into the counter's surface. The dolia kept food hot or cold, depending on the contents. The menu of a typical thermopolium included lentil stew, salted fish, cheese, olives, nuts, bread, and wine diluted with water. In 2019, Archaeologists excavating a thermopolium in the Regio V area of Pompeii found an extraordinary degree of preservation. Food remains were still in the dolia. Analysis identified duck, pig, goat, fish, snails, and beef. Painted images on the counter's front panel showed images of the foods being sold, an ancient equivalent of the illuminated menu boards above modern fast food counters. And on the counter's surface, the marks of 2,000 years of customers leaning on it, worn smooth, in exactly the places where elbows rest. Fact 10. The bread found in Pompeii's bakeries is one of the most famous items in the entire excavation. In 1930, a complete loaf of bread was found in a bakery oven, still in the oven, where it had been placed on the morning of August 24, 79 AD, for baking. The eruption had happened before it was removed. The loaf is circular, scored into 8 sections for easy breaking. Exactly the standard Roman bread form documented in other sources. It is now in the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. A loaf of bread, placed in an oven nearly 2,000 years ago, never taken out, in the same condition it was in when the baker who placed it there turned away to attend to something else, and never came back. Fact 11. The graffiti of Pompeii is one of the most remarkable documentary records of ordinary life in the ancient world. More than 11,000 individual pieces of graffiti have been recorded at Pompeii, scratched into plaster walls, painted in red or black over doorways, chalked on columns. They range from the literary to the obscene to the heartfelt to the mundane. Lovers, like bees, wish life to be as sweet as honey. Restituta, take off your tunic, please, and show us your hairy parts. Chia, I hope your hemorrhoids chafe you so much that they burn worse than they ever have. Pyrrhus to his colleague Chius, I grieve because I hear you have died, and so farewell. Election notices. Vote for Gaius Iulius Polybius as aedile. He gets good bread. Announcements of gladiatorial games. Records of financial transactions. The name of a street food vendor and the prices of his goods. The graffiti of Pompeii is a direct line to the thoughts, the humor, the affections, the grievances, and the ordinary transactions of people who are otherwise invisible to history. Not the emperors and the generals. The people who wrote on walls, because they had something to say, and the wall was there. The people who wrote on walls, because they had something to say. The curse and the lament, and the election notice for the man who got good bread. These were not unusual people. These were the usual people, the kind who have always been in every city in every period, writing on walls, saying things, to no one in particular, to everyone who came after, to you. Fact 12. The streets of Pompeii are one of the most immediately striking features of the site. Not because they are paved. Many ancient cities had paved streets, but because of the specific details of their paving. The streets are deep, narrow channels, with raised pavements on each side where pedestrians walked. At intervals, large stepping stones cross the roadway, high enough to allow pedestrians to cross without stepping into the street, which was routinely used as a drainage channel and dump for waste. The spacing of the stepping stones was precise, wide enough apart to allow cartwheels to pass between them. The stones show the ruts cut by decades of carts. The raised pavement shows the wear of thousands of feet. And the street fountains, small basins fed by lead pipes from the city's aqueduct, positioned at regular intervals along the streets, are worn smooth on their front edges, where people stood to fill their jugs every day for decades. The wear on the stone is the record of the use. Fact 13. Pompeii's water system was one of the most sophisticated in the ancient world. The city was supplied by a branch of the Aqua Augusta, the great aqueduct that served much of the Campania region, which delivered water to a large distribution tank, the Castellum Aquae, at the highest point of the city. From this tank, water flowed by gravity through a network of lead pipes to approximately 40 street fountains, to private houses, and to the city's bath complexes. The pipe system was hierarchical. In times of shortage, the water supply was cut first to private homes, then to the public baths, with the street fountains, the last resort of those who could not afford private supply, always maintained. The Romans understood, in a practical sense, that public water access was more important than private luxury. They built the priority into the infrastructure itself. The fountains always had water, even when the wealthy had none. Fact 14. The houses of Pompeii were not homes in the modern sense. The Roman domus, the large private house of the middle and upper classes, was simultaneously a home, a workplace, a statement of social status, and a place of business. The front rooms of many Pompeian houses, the rooms that opened directly onto the street, were workshops, shops, or professional offices. The interior rooms around the central courtyard, the atrium, were the private family spaces. But even the atrium was semi-public. It was the room where the paterfamilias, the head of the household, received his clients, conducted business, and displayed the masks of his ancestors. Privacy in the Roman sense was not what we mean by the word. The house was a performance space for the performance of social status. And Pompeii's houses were, in their frozen state, still performing. The paintings on the walls still depicting the mythological scenes that told visitors what kind of person lived here. The mosaic floors still spelling out their greetings. Cave Canem, beware of the dog, over a mosaic of a dog straining at its lead, to anyone who crossed the threshold. The status still being performed. For an audience that stopped coming 2,000 years ago. Fact 15. The garden of the House of the Vetii is one of the most beautiful spaces in Pompeii. The Vetii were freedmen, former slaves who had gained their freedom and by the time of the eruption had become wealthy enough to own one of the largest and most expensively decorated houses in the city. Their garden has been restored to something approaching its original condition. The flower beds planted with the species identified from seed and pollen evidence found in the excavation, the bronze fountains working again, the water running through the channels in the garden floor. Around the garden walls, a continuous frieze of painted cupids, erotes, the little winged figures, engaged in every known human occupation. Chariot racing, vintners, fullers, goldsmiths, perfumers, flower sellers. Cupids doing every job. In a garden that has been restored to life. In a house that was buried 2,000 years ago by men who had once been slaves and who decorated their home with joy. Fact 16. The Villa of the Mysteries, just outside the city walls of Pompeii, contains one of the most celebrated paintings from the ancient world. The room known as the Room of the Megalography contains a continuous frieze of approximately life-sized figures painted in a deep, vibrant red, now famous as Pompeii Red, depicting what appears to be an initiation ritual. The specific meaning of the frieze is debated. The dominant interpretation is that it shows a woman being initiated into the Dionysian mysteries, the secret religious rites associated with the god Dionysus. The figures are painted with a psychological intensity rare in ancient art. A woman winces as if receiving a blow. Another turns away. A third lifts a cloth to reveal something. A young boy reads from a scroll. Whatever is being depicted, and scholars have argued about it for a century, the emotional reality of the figures is unmistakable. These are people feeling things, real things, preserved in paint, still feeling them. Fact 17. The excavation of Pompeii is not finished. This bears repeating. Nearly 270 years after the first organized excavation began in 1748, approximately a third of the ancient city remains unexcavated. 1/3 under the ground, still covered. The decision not to excavate the remaining third is deliberate and increasingly defended. Modern archaeological thinking holds that the unexcavated areas should be left in place for two reasons. First, because excavation techniques continue to improve, what can be preserved and documented today far exceeds what was possible in 1748 or even 1980, and what will be possible in 50 years will likely exceed what is possible now. Second, because the excavated areas are already struggling to be adequately conserved and maintained. The exposure of ancient material to air, rain, sunlight, and tourist footfall is a continuous conservation challenge. The unexcavated third is the most valuable thing at Pompeii, because it is still intact, because whatever is there has been undisturbed since August 24th, 79 AD, still waiting, perfectly preserved, under the earth. A third of the city, still under the ground, undisturbed, since the morning of August 24th, 79 AD. The graffiti that hasn't been read yet, the bread that hasn't been found yet, the garden that hasn't been walked yet, the house that was locked when its owner fled, and hasn't been opened since, still there, patient, in the dark, under the earth that keeps everything, the way the night keeps everything, that is given to it, with complete fidelity, for as long as it is needed. A third of Pompeii is still waiting, and the night is waiting for you, with the same patience, the same care, the same complete reliability. Sleep. Pompeii was not the only city destroyed by Vesuvius on August 24th, 79 AD. It was not even the city closest to the eruption. 7 kilometers from Pompeii, on the western slope of the volcano, on the shore of the bay itself, was another city, smaller than Pompeii, wealthier than Pompeii, less famous, less excavated, less visited, and in some ways the more extraordinary find, because Herculaneum was not buried by falling ash and pumice, the way Pompeii was. Herculaneum was buried by pyroclastic flows, by successive waves of superheated gas and volcanic material, moving at extraordinary speed, that buried the city under approximately 20 meters of what geologists call pyroclastic tuff, volcanic material so hot when it arrived that it carboniced every organic substance in the city. Not destroyed it, carboniced it, transformed it into carbon, which does not decay, which lasts. And what Herculaneum preserved, as a result, is something Pompeii cannot match. Wood, furniture, rope, food, fabric, books, the organic material of daily life, preserved not by being buried in dry ash but by being transformed into carbon and then sealed under 20 meters of solid volcanic rock. Fact 18. Herculaneum was a smaller city than Pompeii, approximately 5,000 inhabitants, but considerably more affluent. It was a resort town in effect, a place where wealthy Romans had their sea view villas, their private bath complexes, their fish ponds. Its position on the bay, with views south across the water, made it a desirable address. The city had a grid of streets, a forum, temples, a palestra, a large exercise ground, and some of the finest domestic architecture in the Roman world. It also had a beach, where, in the 1980s, during excavations of the ancient shoreline, archaeologists found something that changed everything previously understood about the eruption of 79 AD. Fact 19. The conventional understanding for most of the 200 years of Pompeii's excavation was that most of the inhabitants of Herculaneum had escaped. The bodies found during earlier excavations were few. The city seemed to have been largely evacuated. Then, in 1982, archaeologist Giuseppe Maggi began excavating the ancient beachfront, the shoreline as it existed in 79 AD, now buried under the city. He found boat chambers, stone-arched recesses built into the seawall, used for storing boats in winter. And in the boat chambers, packed tightly, lying on top of each other, skeletons. 300 of them initially. Eventually, over the following years, the remains of more than 300 individuals. They had run to the beach. They had found the boats gone, taken by those who fled earlier. They had sheltered in the boat chambers and waited for rescue that did not come, for boats that did not arrive, until the pyroclastic surge reached the shore. And it was over in seconds. 300 people in the boat chambers, waiting for boats that were gone. The rescue not coming, the surge coming instead. The ordinary human act of going to the shore when the ship was the only way out, and finding no ships. Just the waiting, just the dark of the boat chamber, and each other. Fact 20. The skeletons found at Herculaneum's beachfront told stories. Not metaphorically. The bones themselves were analyzed. For diet, for age, for occupation, for health, for the injuries of a life lived in the 1st century AD. One skeleton, found crouching, the bones of a horse next to him, was identified from the military equipment nearby as a soldier. A ring on his finger, a sword belt, a bag of coins. He had not been fleeing. He was on duty, possibly sent to assist in the rescue operation. He had not made it off the beach either. Another skeleton, a woman, was found with elaborate gold jewelry. Rings, a bracelet, earrings, a necklace, and a small box containing what appeared to be further jewelry, still clasped in her arm. She had packed her valuables, the way anyone would if they had time. The jewelry she is wearing tells us she was wealthy. The box in her arm tells us she was afraid. Fact 21. The Villa of the Papyri at Herculaneum is the most extraordinary private library ever found from the ancient world. It was not in Herculaneum proper, but in a large suburban villa, possibly belonging to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar, on the outskirts of the city. The villa was first discovered in the 1750s through exploratory tunnels dug through the volcanic rock. Inside, in a room that appeared to have been the library, were approximately 1,800 papyrus scrolls, carbonised by the pyroclastic flow, rolled up and stacked on shelves that had since collapsed. Completely black, completely fragile, essentially impossible to unroll without destroying them. The excavators of the 1750s unrolled many of them anyway, destroying them in the process. The ones that were saved, not unrolled, simply removed intact, have been the subject of increasingly sophisticated attempts at reading for 250 years. Fact 22. The Herculaneum scrolls are still being read. The Vesuvius Challenge, a competition launched in 2023 with substantial cash prizes, challenged researchers to use machine learning and advanced imaging techniques to read the scrolls without physically unrolling them. The scrolls contain the carbonised ink on carbonised papyrus. The ink, as it turns out, has a different density from the papyrus, different enough to be detected by high-resolution X-ray scanning, different enough when the scans are processed by a machine learning algorithm trained to recognize the shapes of ancient Greek letters to be read. In 2023, a 21-year-old computer science student named Luke Farrader became the first person to read words from a sealed, unopened Herculaneum scroll. The word was Pi-Omicron Rho-Phi-Rho Alpha. Porphyros, purple, the color associated with royalty and luxury in the ancient world. In what context, in what sentence, connected to what thought, we do not yet fully know. But a word from a scroll sealed in volcanic rock for nearly 2,000 years. Read, for the first time since the person who wrote it was alive. Fact 23. The content of the scrolls, as they have been partially deciphered, appears to be primarily philosophical. Specifically, the works of a philosopher named Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean who lived in the 1st century BC and was associated with the villa's owner. The Epicurean philosophy, which held that the goal of human life was pleasure, correctly understood as the absence of pain and the presence of tranquil enjoyment, was popular among the Roman elite of the late Republic. The Villa of the Papyri, with its sea views and its fish ponds and its 1800 books, was itself a kind of Epicurean project, a life arranged for tranquil enjoyment, interrupted by the mountain. But there are other texts in the collection, works whose identity is not yet established, lost works of Greek philosophy, Latin literature, history, works that may exist nowhere else. The possibility that the sealed rooms of the Villa of the Papyri contain the lost works of Aristotle, of Sappho, of Livius, of Ennius, is not absurd. It is possible. It is why the scrolls are still being worked on. Fact 24. The wooden furniture found at Herculaneum is unique in the ancient world. Because wood does not survive at Pompeii, the ash and pumice preserved buildings and bodies but not the organic material inside them. The Carboniste wood of Herculaneum is the only substantial collection of Roman furniture in existence. Beds, with their turned wooden legs and their woven wooden slats. Shelves, cradles, chests and cabinets, wooden screens. The internal domestic environment of a Roman house, what it actually looked like from the inside day to day, is preserved at Herculaneum and almost nowhere else. The furniture is black, Carboniste black, but intact. The grain of the wood visible under examination. The joinery still sound. 2,000-year-old woodwork, still holding together, in a warehouse at the Herculaneum site. Fact 25. A Roman thermopolium counter in Herculaneum was found with a set of wooden shelves still attached to the wall behind it, still holding the ceramic vessels, stacked, the way a shop stacks its stock, the way any storage space arranges its contents. The vessels, ready for use. The shelves, still bearing their weight. The shop, open, and nobody in it, and nobody coming. The ordinary arrangement of a working space, preserved at the moment it stopped being a working space, and became instead a record of itself. Fact 26. The eruption of 79 AD changed the coastline. Not slightly, significantly. The ancient coastline of the Bay of Naples, the shoreline as it existed in 79 AD, the shore where the people of Herculaneum ran to find boats, is now several hundred meters inland from the modern coastline. The volcanic material deposited by the eruption extended the land into the bay. The modern city of Herculaneum, Ercolano, sits on top of the ancient city. You can stand on a modern street in Ercolano and be directly above a Roman house, directly above a mosaic floor, a painted wall, a garden, a room where someone was eating when the surge came. The modern city living on top of the ancient one, separated by 20 meters of rock, and 2,000 years. The modern city directly above the ancient one, 20 meters of rock between them, 2,000 years between them, and above you right now is the rest of the night, and above that, the sky, and above that, the stars, layers, all the way up, all the way down, the wooden shelves, still holding the ceramic vessels, the word purple in a sealed scroll, the 300 people in the boat chambers, the jewelry in the woman's arms, everything kept. In the layer it was left in. You are in your layer tonight, the present one, the warm one, the one where you are resting, while the layers below keep what they keep, and the layers above hold what they hold. Sleep. There is a question that hangs over Pompeii that no other ancient site quite poses in the same way. What was it like to be there? Not in the abstract, not in the generalized historical sense. What was it like to be standing in the Forum on the morning of August 24th, 79 AD? What could you see and smell and hear? What was happening around you? What were you thinking about? These questions, usually impossible to answer about the ancient world, usually unanswerable without the kind of daily documentation that ancient people did not leave, are answerable for Pompeii. Because Pompeii preserved not just objects. It preserved time. The city stopped at a specific moment, and the moment is recoverable. Not completely, not with absolute certainty on every detail, but to a degree that is extraordinary. We can reconstruct the last day, hour by hour. Fact 27. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD was, by every indication, an ordinary morning. The date itself is significant. It was the day after the Vulcanalia, the festival of Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. The Vulcanalia was celebrated with bonfires and offerings thrown into flames. The Roman city celebrated the god of volcanic fire, the day before a volcanic eruption. Not because they knew what was coming, because they didn't. The festival had been celebrated in the same way, on the same date, for generations. It was simply the calendar which happened by chance to place a festival of fire immediately before the most devastating volcanic eruption in Roman history. Fact 28. The eruption began shortly after noon. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay at Misenum, recorded that his mother drew his uncle's attention to an unusual cloud at approximately the 7th hour, roughly 1 in the afternoon by modern reckoning. The cloud was rising from Vesuvius in the shape of a pine tree. The term Plinian eruption is now used for all eruptions that produce this characteristic column shape, named in honor of Pliny the Elder's description. The column rose to approximately 32 kilometers in height. At that altitude, the material in the column, pumice, ash, superheated gas, was spread by winds westward and southward. Pompeii lay directly in the path. Herculaneum, to the northwest of Vesuvius, initially lay upwind. For the first hours of the eruption, Pompeii received the fall of pumice and ash. Herculaneum was mostly spared the falling debris. The two cities would have very different immediate experiences of the same mountain on the same afternoon. Fact 29. The fall of pumice on Pompeii began slowly and then intensified. The pumice stones were light. They floated on water, as Pliny the Younger noted, but they fell in enormous quantities. The accumulation was rapid. Archaeological evidence suggests the pumice was falling at a rate of approximately 15 to 20 centimeters per hour. Heavier stone and ash fell in bursts as the eruption column pulsed. By the time of darkness, which came long before actual sunset, the ash cloud so thick that Pliny the Younger described a darkness darker than any night he had experienced. The streets of Pompeii were already buried under more than a meter of material. Roofs were collapsing under the weight. Many of the people still in the city were sheltering inside, only to be killed when the roofs gave way. Others made it outside only to be struck by the falling pumice. The first wave of deaths was from the accumulation and the collapse. The final wave, the pyroclastic surges, came in the early hours of the morning. Fact 30. Pliny the Elder sailed toward the disaster. He was commander of the Roman fleet at Misenum, responsible for the ships and men stationed on the western side of the bay. When the column appeared, he responded in two ways simultaneously. He ordered a quadrireme prepared to take him across the bay, partly to observe the phenomenon scientifically. He was a natural historian of extraordinary range, and partly because he received a message from a friend, Rectina, whose villa at the base of the volcano made escape by land impossible and who was begging for rescue by sea. He sailed toward the eruption. With his notebooks, he attempted to land at Rectina's villa. But the sea was too rough. The eruption had stirred up the water, and the shore was blocked by falling pumice and debris. He changed course to the home of another friend, Pomponianus, at Stabii, a few kilometers further down the coast. He stayed the night, slept soundly, or appeared to. In the morning, as the pyroclastic surges swept down the mountain and across the coast, he was found dead on the beach. The cause, probably a heart attack, triggered by the toxic gases and physical exertion, took him exactly where his curiosity had led him, as close to the eruption as he could get, with his notebooks. Pliny the Elder, sailing toward it, with his notebooks, the most natural response in the world, for someone whose life was the study of natural things, to go closer, to look, to write it down. He did not make it back, but his nephew did, and his nephew wrote it down instead. The letters that are the only eyewitness account of the most significant volcanic eruption in recorded Western history, carried forward by the one who watched from a safe distance, while the other sailed into it. Fact 31. Pompeii was not simply a city of private life. It was a deeply political city. The evidence of Roman democratic processes, imperfect, hierarchical, but genuine, is more visible at Pompeii than at almost any other site in the ancient world. Because Pompeii stopped in the middle of a political campaign. The city's walls were covered in programmata, painted political announcements, election notices, advertising candidates for the positions of aedile and duumvir, the magistrates who governed the city. More than 2,500 programmata have been recorded. They name candidates. They name their supporters. The fruit sellers endorse Halconius Priscus as duumvir. The muleteers endorse Gaius Iulius Polybius. All the late drinkers endorse Marcus Cyrenius Vadia. The late drinkers had their candidate, the man who presumably bought the drinks and earned their endorsement. A political campaign, frozen on the walls, of a city that never got to hold its election. Fact 32. The gladiators of Pompeii were still in their barracks when the eruption came. The gladiators' barracks, the large complex near the large theater where gladiators lived, trained, and were kept, was excavated in the 18th and 19th centuries and found to contain the remains of several individuals. Among them, 63 people crowded into a single room, apparently sheltering as the eruption began. The location is strange. Not the courtyard, not the individual cells. One room, full of people, including women, including at least one child, including individuals whose skeletal remains suggested they were not gladiators. The best guess, and it is a guess, is that a performance or an event in the nearby theater had brought a crowd of spectators into the barracks complex for shelter as the pumice began to fall. Who they were, why they chose that room, what they were thinking as they pressed together, is not in the record. Only the room, with 63 sets of bones, still gathered, in the space where they sheltered. Fact 33. The city of Pompeii was in the middle of a building boom when the eruption came. Not only the ongoing repairs from the earthquake of 62 AD, new construction as well. The baths near the Forum were under construction. Scaffolding and building materials were found at multiple sites. Fresh plaster, still wet in some places when the eruption came, was found on walls being replastered. The city was being improved, being added to, being invested in, by people who expected it to continue, to be there, to be worth the investment. The mortar was still wet. Fact 34. The dogs of Pompeii are among the most poignant details of the excavation. The famous cave Cana mosaic, the beware of the dog image in black and white mosaic tile, at the entrance to the house of the tragic poet, is one of the most recognized images from the ancient world. And in at least one excavated house, a dog was found in the position its cast captured. Twisted, contorted, raised in the air above the level of the accumulated pumice. The dog had been chained. As the pumice accumulated, it had climbed to stay above the rising level, higher and higher, until the chain ran out, and it could climb no further. The cast of the dog from the house of Viconius Primus is one of the most frequently reproduced images from Pompeii. It is not grotesque. It is simply a dog, trying, until it couldn't. Fact 35. The grapes of Pompeii are still, in a sense, being grown. The vineyards around Vesuvius, the same volcanic soil that made Pompeii famous for its wine, the same grape varieties whose seeds have been found in the excavation, still produce wine. Modern archaeobotanists have identified and propagated ancient grape varieties from seeds and pollen preserved at Pompeii. Wine is now being produced from grapes descended from the same vines that produced the wine shipped across the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. The continuity is not unbroken. The vineyards around the volcano have been replanted many times since the eruption. But the soil is the same soil. The volcanic earth is the same volcanic earth. The wine from the slopes of Vesuvius today is grown in the same conditions, in the same place, as the wine that was being made when the mountain erupted. The vintage continues. The mountain that destroyed the city also made the wine that made the city famous. The same earth, giving and taking, in its own time. The wet mortar, the dog climbing, the late drinkers endorsing their candidate. Pliny the Elder with his notebooks, the 63 people in the gladiators' room, all of them in the last hours, going about their last ordinary things, not knowing, the most human of all human conditions, the not knowing, the continuing, because the continuing is what you do when you don't know, which is most of the time. You are continuing right now, in the dark, not knowing most of what is coming, and that is fine. The city continued until it stopped, and the stopping preserved the continuing. Forever, let your continuing stop for tonight. Rest. The mountain is quiet. The wine is growing. The grapes are on the vine. The earth is doing what the earth does. Sleep. When people flee, they take things. Not the same things. Not always the rational things. Not always the things that, in retrospect, they would have chosen. They take what is nearest, what is most beloved, what represents the most urgent version of what they need to carry forward into whatever comes next. In the archaeology of disaster, in the material record of people making fast decisions under impossible circumstances, there is a category of object that archaeologists call abandoned property. Things left behind not by accident, not by forgetfulness, but by the forced calculation of flight. The thing you wanted to take but couldn't. The thing you set down to run faster. The thing you hid with the intention of coming back, and didn't. Pompeii is full of abandoned property, hidden in walls, buried under thresholds, locked in strongboxes in the cellar. The record of what people thought they could return to, of what they believed was worth hiding rather than taking, of the future they were still imagining, even as the mountain burned. Fact 36. Treasure hoards are found regularly at Pompeii, not of the spectacular golden jewels variety, though those exist too. Everyday treasure, the savings of a shopkeeper, hidden in a jar buried under the floor, a collection of coins of various denominations, the working capital of a business, found in a strongbox in the back room, a pouch of silver coins in a leather bag. These hoards represent the urgent prioritization of disaster. The person who had time to bury the savings under the floor but not to take them also, or who buried them believing the eruption would pass, the house would survive, they would return and dig them up. The decision made under incomplete information. The wrong call, with the information available. The right call given what they knew at the time, which was, the mountain has been behaving strangely, we should get out, but we will be back. Fact 37. The Boscorial treasure, found not in Pompeii itself but in a villa estate in the town of Boscorial, a few kilometers north, is one of the most significant collections of Roman silver ever found. In 1895, a farmer excavating the remains of the ancient villa found, in a wine press room, a skeleton. Beside the skeleton, a large silver collection. 108 pieces. Cups, platters, bowls, spoons, ladles. 2 gold bracelets. A bag containing 1,035 gold coins. The person had apparently been attempting to escape with the silver, or had gathered it for safekeeping, and had not made it out. The silver had been buried loosely in the debris, not deliberately hidden, as in many other Pompeian hoards, but simply dropped or abandoned in the moment of crisis. The collection is now divided between the Louvre in Paris and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The person who gathered it is still in Boscorial, in a box, in a museum. Fact 38. The objects that were taken, rather than left, also tell a story. Houses excavated at Pompeii show clear evidence of hasty departure. Rooms where furniture has been moved. Walls where brackets and hooks are empty of what they once held. Floors where the indentations of heavy objects, strongboxes, large ceramic vessels, show they were once there but are not there now. Someone lifted them, carried them out, into the street, with the intention of taking them. Whether they succeeded depends on when they left. Those who left early enough, before the pumice became too heavy, before the roads became impassable, may well have survived, carrying their belongings, walking north or south, away from the column, to whatever came next. Their stories are not in the archaeological record, because they left, and the archaeological record is made of what remained. The ones who left are not in the record. The record is made of what remained. The absence of the thing is also evidence. The empty hook, the moved furniture, the indentation in the floor, telling you something was there, and was taken, by someone who made it. The survivors, invisible, in the record of what they left behind. Fact 39. The skeleton known as the Ring Lady is one of the most poignant finds at Herculaneum. Found in the boat chambers on the ancient beach, she was a woman of approximately 45 to 50 years old. She was wearing gold jewelry of considerable value. 2 gold rings on her right hand, a pair of gold earrings, a gold bracelet with a serpent design. The serpent bracelet was a common form of Roman jewelry, considered protective. She also had with her a wooden jewelry box. The box was found open. She had apparently been looking through it, or adding to it, or taking from it, when the surge came. The Ring Lady is one of the few individuals from Herculaneum whose material life, the objects she owned, the jewelry she wore, the portable wealth she gathered in the crisis, is recoverable in almost complete detail. She had gold. She had a serpent bracelet to protect her. She had time to pick up her jewelry box. She did not have time for anything else. Fact 40. The looting of Pompeii began almost immediately after the eruption. Roman records suggest that the Emperor Titus, who was deeply engaged with the disaster, visiting the region twice and personally overseeing relief efforts, commissioned surveys of the buried area to identify property. But in the chaos and the disorder of the months following the eruption, organized looting began. Tunnels were dug down through the ash and pumice to reach the buried city. The most valuable objects, bronzes, silver, gold, were extracted. The tunnels can still be seen in some parts of the excavated city. The irregular channels, different from the modern excavation trenches, where ancient looters worked. The ancient looters knew the city. They knew which houses had the most valuable contents. Some of them may have been former residents, coming back to retrieve what they had hidden, or to take what they had left, or simply to salvage what could be salvaged from the buried city that had been their home. Fact 41. The Pompeii Great Project, launched in 2012 with substantial European Union funding, was one of the largest conservation and restoration efforts ever undertaken at an archaeological site. The project focused not on new excavation but on conservation, repairing roofs over exposed frescoes, consolidating walls at risk of collapse, improving drainage to prevent water damage. Pompeii had been deteriorating at an alarming rate for decades. The combination of tourist footfall, inadequate drainage, unprotected exposure to the elements, and decades of underinvestment had produced a crisis of conservation. Frescoes were fading or peeling. Walls were cracking or collapsing. The Garden of the Fugitives, the haunting space where the casts of 13 victims lie in the positions they died in, had a roof in poor repair that was allowing water in. The Great Project addressed the most urgent emergencies. By 2016, the most critical damage had been stabilized. But the work of maintaining a city that is simultaneously an archaeological site, a tourist destination, and a fragile ancient structure exposed to the Italian climate, is never finished. Fact 42. The Regio V excavations, which began in 2017 in the previously unexcavated northern section of Pompeii, have been producing extraordinary finds at a remarkable rate. A large house with elaborate painted walls, a ceremonial room with a frieze depicting scenes from the Trojan War, a street with its shop fronts intact, a stable with the remains of horses, and, most dramatically, in 2020, a ceremonial chariot. Found in a garden just outside the city walls, the chariot was almost entirely intact. Not the kind of chariot used in races or battles. A ceremonial carriage, ornate, bronze-decorated, with iron elements and traces of organic material. Used for public ceremonies, possibly for weddings or for religious processions. The kind of vehicle that might carry a bride to her new home, or a magistrate in procession through the city. Found outside Pompeii, almost perfectly preserved, 2,000 years after the morning it was last used. Fact 43. The fastest growing category of Pompeian find in recent years is not objects. It is writing. Not the graffiti scratched into walls, though that continues to be found. Writing on objects. Inscriptions on pottery, on tools, on amphoras, on the walls of workshops. The writing tells us about supply chains, about ownership, about trade. An amphora found in 2021 carried a painted inscription identifying its original contents as a fish sauce, garum, made from mackerel, from the region of southern Spain. A product made in Spain, shipped to Italy, sold in a Pompeian shop, inscribed with enough detail to trace its entire journey. The global supply chain of the Roman Empire. On a jar, in a shop, in a city that stopped on August 24th, 79 AD. Still readable, still telling the story of how things moved, and were sold, and were eaten, by people who had no idea it was their last meal. Fact 44. There are people buried at Pompeii whose stories we know more about than they knew about themselves. The DNA extracted from skeletal remains has allowed researchers to determine genetic ancestry, disease history, and family relationships. One set of remains, 2 individuals found in a Pompeian house, in adjacent rooms, was initially identified as a mother and son, based on their proximity and the presence of a child's remains. DNA analysis revealed they were not related. The woman was of North African genetic ancestry. The child was of local Italian ancestry. Perhaps they were employer and employee. Perhaps friend and neighbor. perhaps strangers who found themselves in the same house when the eruption came. The physical proximity that suggested one relationship, the DNA revealing a different one, or perhaps no relationship at all. Two people who happened to be in the same building, at the same moment, who happened to end up in adjacent rooms, and whose bones have been lying near each other for 2,000 years, without anyone knowing the accident of proximity was just an accident, until the analysis. Two people in adjacent rooms, not related, just there, together, by circumstance, the accident of proximity, making them to history companions, even if they barely knew each other. There are people near you tonight, also resting, also in the dark, also in adjacent rooms, or across the hall, or in the building next door, connected to you, not by relation, by circumstance, by the accident of being in the same place, at the same time, which is not an accident at all, but the ordinary fabric of a life. All those people, nearby, resting, as you rest, the city breathing, together, sleep. We are halfway through the night, and halfway through 100 facts about the city that stopped on a Tuesday morning in August, nearly 2,000 years ago. And halfway is a good moment to turn from the city's objects, the bread, the chariot, the silver, the scrolls, to its bodies, to the people, not the casts, which are shapes of space rather than preserved flesh. The bones, because the bones of Pompeii and Herculaneum are one of the largest and most detailed collections of skeletal material from the ancient world, and they are being studied with increasing sophistication, with the tools of modern forensic anthropology, of ancient DNA analysis, of isotope chemistry, of the detailed medical reading of what a life leaves in bone. The bones know things about health, about diet, about occupation, about childhood, about the diseases people carried without knowing it and the injuries they sustained and healed from and sustained again. They know specifically what it was like to be a body in the Roman Empire, in the 1st century AD, in one city, in one social moment, and it is a complicated picture. Fact 45. The average height of adult males found at Pompeii was approximately 168 centimeters, about 5 feet 6 inches. Adult females averaged approximately 155 centimeters. These are somewhat shorter than modern Western averages, but not dramatically so. What is more striking is the evidence of childhood malnutrition preserved in the bones. A phenomenon called Harris lines, horizontal lines of denser bone tissue that form at the ends of long bones when growth is interrupted by illness or nutritional deficiency, is visible in a significant proportion of Pompeian skeletal remains. The lines record the moments when the body stopped growing, and then resumed, growth interrupted, by a bad winter, by a disease that passed, by the ordinary hardships of a life in the ancient world. The bones record the interruptions, the resilience that came after, the body going on. Fact 46. The teeth of Pompeii's inhabitants were, by modern standards, in remarkable condition. Despite the absence of toothbrushes, toothpaste, or modern dentistry, the skeletal remains show relatively little tooth decay. The reason? The Roman diet was low in refined sugar. Sugar was expensive, rare, and used primarily as medicine or flavoring in small quantities. The sweetness in Roman food came primarily from fruit, honey, and a grape-based syrup called defrutum. None of these produces the kind of tooth decay that characterizes modern post-industrial populations. The Romans did have dental problems. Tooth wear from the grit in stone-ground flour, abscesses, gum disease visible in the bone around the tooth sockets. But cavities, The rampant tooth decay that became the defining dental affliction of modern populations when refined sugar became widely available in the 19th century were not a major feature of the Roman dental record. The teeth preserved in Pompeii are often better than the teeth of 19th century London, better than the teeth of people who had toothbrushes, simply because the diet was different. The teeth, in good condition. The bones, recording the interruptions. The body going on. The body has always been going on, through the winters and the diseases and the absences, through the interrupted growths and the resumptions, through everything. Right now, your body is going on, without your attention, without your effort, in the dark, as it has always done, as bodies have always done, since before there was anyone to think about bodies. Fact 47. The House of the Surgeon in Pompeii is named for the extraordinary collection of surgical instruments found within it. Over 40 individual instruments, probes, scalpels, forceps, hooks, needles, made of bronze and iron, found in a wooden case that had carbonice around them. The instruments are remarkably sophisticated. Many are functionally identical to instruments still in use in modern surgery. The same basic forms, refined over centuries, have not been substantially improved upon for these particular applications. Roman medicine was not primitive. The Pompeian surgical kit includes instruments for eye surgery, for wound care, for the removal of foreign objects, for gynecological procedures. The physician who owned them, whose identity is not known, had the tools for a wide range of medical interventions. The case was found near the entrance of the house. Perhaps the physician had been preparing to take it with him, or had just arrived home with it. In either case, it was left, the tools still in their case, ready for the next patient, who did not come. Fact 48. Lead is everywhere in Pompeii, in the water pipes, in the cooking vessels, in the wine, deliberately added as a sweetener, in the form of lead acetate, which has a pleasant sweet taste and which the Romans called sappa or defrutum depending on its concentration. The bones of Pompeian inhabitants show elevated lead levels compared to modern populations. Some researchers have argued that lead poisoning was a chronic condition of the Roman elite, who drank more wine prepared in lead vessels, producing neurological effects that might help explain some of the more erratic behavior of Roman emperors. This is a contested hypothesis. What is not contested is that the Romans were exposed to lead at levels we would now consider unacceptable. They did not know. They had no framework for understanding the toxicity of a metal they found extremely useful. The water pipes worked. The wine tasted sweeter. The trade-off was invisible. Until the bones. Fact 49. Roman children went to school. The evidence of childhood education at Pompeii is vivid and specific. Writing exercises have been found scratched into plaster walls, not by adults, but by children practicing their letters. The same passage from Virgil's Aeneid appears on multiple walls, in different hands, suggesting it was a standard school text. The same text, committed to plaster by many different children, in the same city, who were learning the same lessons, from the same teachers, or the same cultural expectations about what educated Romans should know. Latin letters, scratched into walls, by small hands, still there. Fact 50. We are at 50. The halfway point, and it seems right, here in the middle of our journey through the frozen city, to sit with what this series has been building toward. Pompeii is not extraordinary because it is spectacular. It is extraordinary because it is ordinary, because what it preserved was not the official, the ceremonial, the designed to last. It preserved the daily, the breakfast that was being eaten, the argument that was being had, the election that was being campaigned for, the child practicing their letters, the dog trying to climb above the rising ash, the physician preparing his bag, the woman picking up her jewelry box, the builder with wet mortar on his hands. These are not the moments that history typically records. History records the battles, the emperors, the grand projects. Pompeii records the Tuesday morning, the ordinary Tuesday, the kind that existed before it, and the kind that came after, and the kind that exists right now, for you. Fact 51. The population of Pompeii was considerably more diverse than the popular image of a Roman city might suggest. DNA analysis of skeletal remains from Pompeii and Herculaneum has found genetic ancestry from across the Roman Empire and beyond. North Africa, the Near East, the Eastern Mediterranean, Sub-Saharan Africa. The Roman Empire was, at its height, one of the most interconnected and mobile societies in the ancient world. People moved, as slaves, as freed persons, as soldiers, as merchants, as artisans following work. The genetic diversity of Pompeii reflects a city that was genuinely cosmopolitan, not the ethnically uniform Roman city of popular imagination, but a city where people from many origins lived alongside each other, in the Thermopolium, at the baths, in the streets, on the night of August 24th. Fact 52. The role of women at Pompeii was more complex than Roman law formally allowed. Roman law placed women under the legal authority of their fathers or husbands. But the practical reality at Pompeii, as revealed by the graffiti, the electoral programmata, the business records, was more complicated. Women appear as business owners, running shops in their own names. Women appear as supporters of election candidates. Stadia and Petronia ask you to vote for Gnaeus Helvius, a form of public political engagement not formally sanctioned but clearly practiced. Women's names appear on tombs as patrons of burial clubs, as priestesses of Isis, as donors to public buildings. The gap between what the law permitted and what the society actually did, as visible at Pompeii as anywhere in the ancient world, is one of the most interesting features of the excavation. The law said one thing, the walls said another. Fact 53. The Garden of Pompeii, the gardens of private houses, the public spaces planted with trees and flowers, was not merely decorative. Roman gardens were philosophical statements. The idea of the hortus, the enclosed garden, as a space for contemplation, for philosophy, for the Epicurean pursuit of calm and the absence of disturbance, was deeply embedded in Roman elite culture. The garden was where you went to think, to talk, to escape the noise of the city. The garden was, in a very real sense, the ancient equivalent of the room you go to when you need to be quiet. The plants identified from Pompeian gardens, by pollen, by seeds, by the root casts preserved in the volcanic material, include roses, irises, oleanders, violets, plane trees, box hedges, and fruit trees. A garden designed to be beautiful and to be still. The stillness, preserved, in the pollen, in the root casts, in the space that was designed for exactly what you are doing now. The garden designed for stillness. The woman with her jewelry box. The child practicing Virgil. The physician's instruments, packed and ready. The diverse city going about its Tuesday. The ordinary Tuesday. That is also what today was. The kind that contains all of it. The argument and the election and the bread in the oven. And now the night, which is what comes after the ordinary Tuesday. Always. The night. The still. The dark garden. The mind going quiet. The body going on without instruction. In the dark. In the preserved. In the city that stopped. And in the night that continues. Sleep. When Pompeii was rediscovered in the 18th century, it did not simply add to the existing stock of knowledge about the ancient world. It changed the way the modern world understood itself. The excavations produced images, engravings, watercolors, published in lavish volumes that circulated across Europe, that showed ancient rooms still decorated with their original paint, furniture still in place, streets you could walk down in your imagination because they were so complete. Ancient Greece and Rome had been visible to the educated European through texts, through Virgil and Livy and Cicero and Tacitus and the fragments of 100 other writers, and through the surviving architectural monuments. But Pompeii showed something different. It showed the inside, the domestic interior, the daily life, and the impact on European culture was immediate, profound, and lasting. Fact 54. Pompeii red, the deep, vibrant red used on the walls of so many Pompeian houses, became one of the most fashionable colors in 18th and 19th century Europe. Not because it was new, because it was original, because it was the actual color on the actual walls of rooms where actual Romans had lived. The Pompeii red palette influenced interior decoration across Europe and America throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Thomas Jefferson used it at Monticello. The fashion for neoclassical design, clean lines, classical motifs, the Greek keyboarder that swept Europe and America in the late 18th century drew heavily on the aesthetics revealed by the Pompeian excavations. The rooms in the Georgian townhouses of Edinburgh and Dublin and London, the federal-style interiors of American cities, were shaped in part by the painted walls of a city buried in 79 AD. Fact 55. The Neapolitan royal family, the Bourbon rulers of the Kingdom of Naples, who sponsored the excavations, initially kept the most significant finds under tight control. Access to the museum at Porticai, where the Pompeian and Herculaneum treasures were displayed, was restricted. Foreign visitors, and many came, drawn by the extraordinary stories circulating across Europe, required special permission. The reason for the restrictions was partly the erotic art. Pompeii contained a great deal of it. Priapic figurines, explicitly sexual frescoes, phallic imagery used as good luck symbols and protective charms above doorways and on walls. The fascinum, the phallus, which was ubiquitous in Roman public and domestic space as an apotropaic symbol. The Bourbon court was Catholic and conservative. The erotic material was separated from the rest of the collection and locked in a room, now known as the Secret Cabinet of the National Archaeological Museum of Naples, accessible only to people of mature age and respected morals. The Secret Cabinet was opened to the general public for the first time in 2000. 2,000 years of Roman frankness about the body, finally visible to everyone. Fact 56. The Temple of Isis at Pompeii was one of the most completely preserved ancient temples found at the time of its excavation in 1764. The temple was dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Isis, whose cult had spread across the Roman world by the 1st century AD and had become one of the most popular mystery religions of the empire. The temple was elaborately decorated. Its painted walls showed mythological scenes from the Egyptian tradition. Its inner sanctuary held a container for Nile water, used in ritual. The find was significant enough that King Ferdinand IV of Naples gave his 8-year-old son, Ferdinand William, the honor of presiding over the last stage of the excavation, because the boy king needed to learn the business of patronage. The Temple of Isis influenced every European artist who saw it, read about it, or saw the engravings circulated across the continent. Mozart, who visited Naples as a boy, is believed to have seen the temple or its documentation. The magic ritual in his opera The Magic Flute, set in an Egyptian temple, suffused with the imagery of Isis and Osiris, may owe something to the Temple of Isis at Pompeii, the frozen city shaping a masterpiece, 2 centuries after its burial. The Temple of Isis, the boy king presiding over the excavation, the magic ritual, the frozen city reaching forward into the 18th century, into Mozart's imagination, into your world, the past always reaching forward, into the present, into whatever you are thinking about, in the dark, right now. The past is not behind you. It is in the walls, in the color of the room, in the music, in all of it. Fact 57. The religious life of Pompeii was remarkably plural. The Roman religious tradition was, by modern standards, extraordinarily tolerant, not from any principle of religious freedom, but from a practical theology that saw all gods as potentially real and worthy of propitiation. The Pompeian Forum had temples to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the Capitoline triad. There was a temple of Apollo, a temple of Isis, a temple of Fortuna Augusta, shrines to the Lares, the household gods, at street corners across the city, painted with images and decorated with offerings, and evidence, from graffiti and from material finds, of the presence of the early Christian community, though it was still small and unofficial in 79 AD, and evidence of a Jewish community, from an inscription mentioning the Herodian princess Berenice in a context that has been interpreted as evidence of Jewish commercial activity in the city. All of this in one city, on one Tuesday morning. Fact 58. Asterisk asterisk. Vesuvius has erupted many times since 79 AD. Not continuously. The volcano has periods of dormancy that can last centuries, punctuated by eruptions of varying intensity. Major eruptions occurred in 472 AD, 1139, 1631, and a series of eruptions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the last of which was in 1944. The 1944 eruption destroyed the town of San Sebastiano al Vesuvio. Allied airmen stationed in the area photographed the eruption. Extraordinary images of lava flows advancing through a Second World War landscape, bombers and lava in the same frame. The mountain is currently in a period of low-level unrest, fumarolic activity, occasional minor earthquakes, the standard behavior of a dormant but not extinct volcano. The area around the volcano is now home to approximately 3 million people, the most densely populated volcanic zone in the world. Fact 59. Modern volcanology owes an enormous debt to the eruption of 79 AD. The eruption, as described by Pliny the Younger, the column, the darkness, the pumice fall, the pyroclastic surges, became the template against which subsequent eruptions were measured and classified. The Plinian eruption column is named for him. The study of what happened at Pompeii and Herculaneum, the sequence of events, the deposits left by each phase of the eruption, the evidence preserved in the geological and archaeological record, allowed volcanologists to develop models of volcanic behavior that have since been applied to understanding volcanoes worldwide. Pompeii is not just an archaeological site. It is a geological reference point. A precisely dated, precisely documented example of a volcanic eruption that shaped how scientists understand the category. The catastrophe that taught us how catastrophes of its kind work. Fact 60. The Zona Rossa, the red zone, is the area around Vesuvius designated as requiring immediate evacuation in the event of an eruption warning. It covers 18 municipalities. It has a population of approximately 700,000 people. The evacuation plan, developed over decades and updated regularly, involves moving this population by road and rail within approximately 72 hours of a warning. Whether 72 hours is sufficient, whether the roads can handle the traffic, whether the warning will come early enough, are questions that volcanologists and emergency planners work on continuously. A major eruption of Vesuvius today would be one of the largest natural disasters in modern European history. Not a hypothetical catastrophe, a real one, being actively prepared for by the people who live under the same mountain, that the people of Pompeii never thought would erupt. Fact 61. The body of Pliny the Elder was found on the beach at Stabii. His nephew's letters describe him as having been resting during the night, sleeping, which Pliny the Younger notes with some wonder, given the circumstances, and suggests indicates his uncle's extraordinary equanimity. In the morning, when the pyroclastic surges began sweeping down the coast, Pliny was helped to his feet. He collapsed and did not rise again. The cause of death was probably cardiac arrest, possibly aggravated by the toxic gases in the air. He was 56 years old. He had spent his adult life studying the natural world, compiling his natural history, an encyclopedia of ancient knowledge across 37 books, and commanding the fleet. He died doing what he had always done, going toward the thing that needed to be understood, with his notebooks, the notebooks that were not found on his body, which he presumably lost, or which were buried with him in the ash, or which someone else picked up in the chaos and carried away, and are somewhere or nowhere. We don't know. Fact 62. The eruption of 79 AD has a date, August 24th, or it did, for most of the history of Pompey's study. The date came from the two letters of Pliny the Younger, which specify the 9th day before the calends of September, August 24th, by the Roman calendar. But in 2018, archaeologists working in the Regio V excavations found a charcoal inscription on the wall of a house being renovated. The inscription gave a date, the 16th day before the calends of November, which corresponds to October 17th, not August. October. The inscription was fresh, the charcoal too fragile to have survived the rainy season between August and the following spring, suggesting it was made very close to the time of the eruption. If the inscription is what it appears to be, the eruption did not happen on August 24th. It happened in October. Nearly 2,000 years of accepted history, overturned by a line of charcoal on a wall, still being debated, still not entirely resolved. A line of charcoal on a wall, changing the date of one of the most documented events in ancient history, still being debated. The past, still being revised, still yielding surprises. After 2,000 years, one line, on a wall, in a house that was being renovated 2,000 years ago, by a builder, with charcoal in his hand, who could not have known what he was writing. For us, the smallest things, the most ordinary things, turn out to matter the most. Your ordinary Tuesday, your ordinary night, these things matter in ways that aren't always visible yet. Sleep into it, the dark that preserves, the night that keeps, without judgment, without preference, everything. Sleep. There is something that happens to people who visit Pompeii for the first time. Not the seasoned archaeologist, not the academic who has spent years with the scholarly literature. The ordinary visitor, the person who arrives through the modern entrance, follows the path into the excavated area and finds themselves on a Roman street. The stone paving under their feet, the stepping stones across the road, the facades of the buildings on either side, the mountain visible at the end of the street in the direction of north. What happens is a specific kind of disorientation, not disorientation in the confused sense, disorientation in the recalibration sense, the feeling that your understanding of the distance between yourself and the past has just been revised, dramatically, downward. The past, it turns out, is much closer than you thought, not in time, in texture, in the specific, particular, material texture of how it felt to be a body moving through a physical world. Fact 63. The experience of walking Pompeii is shaped by sound, not the sounds of the ancient city, those are gone, the sounds of the current one. Pompeii receives approximately 3.5 million visitors per year. On a busy day, the streets are crowded in the way that tourist streets everywhere are crowded. But in the early morning, when the site opens and the tour groups have not yet arrived, or in the late afternoon, when they have left, the city has a different quality. The sound of wind through the ruins. The birds nesting in the roofless houses. The specific quality of silence that comes from being in a space designed for human activity from which human activity has been absent for 2,000 years. It is not complete silence. Silence never is. But it is the closest thing to the acoustic quality of an abandoned space that most people will ever experience. A city that is simultaneously always visited and essentially never inhabited. Fact 64. The Garden of the Fugitives is the single most emotionally affecting space in all of Pompeii. It is a large vineyard, an actual vineyard, replanted in the ancient furrows whose root casts were preserved in the volcanic material, enclosed by walls, and in an arched recess at the end of the garden. The casts, 13 of them, a family group, 2 adults, several children, who took shelter in the garden as the eruption reached its final phase. They were overtaken by the final pyroclastic surge. Their casts are arranged approximately as they were found. Not behind glass. Not elevated on a platform. At ground level. In the garden. Among the vines. You stand 3 feet from them. At the height they are at. And look at them. The adult covering a child. The people huddled together. The ordinary, universal human response to overwhelming threat. Find the people you love. Get close. Stay together. Fact 65. The digital reconstruction of Pompeii is one of the most ambitious projects in archaeological visualization. Multiple projects, using photogrammetry, 3D scanning, archival documentation, and computer graphics, have attempted to reconstruct what the city looked like in 79 AD. Not just the buildings, the color, the sound, the movement, what it looked like when the painted walls were fresh, when the fountains were running, when the thermopolium was busy and the streets were full of carts and the smell of baking bread and the shouts of the market and the particular quality of light in the Mediterranean in August or October. These reconstructions are imperfect. They make assumptions. They guess at what is not documented. But they do something extraordinary. They allow people who will never visit Pompeii, and many of the 3.5 million who visit every year would benefit from seeing it before they arrive, to understand what they are going to see. Not ruins. A city. Fact 66. The House of the Tragic Poet, named for a mosaic depicting a theatrical rehearsal, is one of the most famous houses in Pompeii. Not because it is the largest, not because it is the most elaborate, because of the mosaic at its entrance. The cave canon. Beware of the dog. A black and white mosaic of a dog on a lead, looking up at the visitor, ears forward. The dog is not ferocious. It is alert. It is doing its job, which is to be noticed, to make the visitor look down, to say in the universal language of a well-made picture in the floor, someone lived here, someone had a dog, someone wanted you to know it. The specific someone is unknown. The dog is known. The dog at the door, still warning, still there. Fact 67. The National Archaeological Museum of Naples, where the most significant finds from Pompeii and Herculaneum have been housed since the 18th century, contains one of the most extraordinary collections of Roman art in the world. Not because the objects are individually unique in the way that the Elgin marbles or the Rosetta Stone are unique, but because of the context they came with. These objects were found in situ, in rooms, in houses, in the positions they occupied when the eruption came. The statue that stood at the end of a garden. The bronze bust that watched from a shelf. The mosaic that covered the floor of a dining room. They arrived in the museum with their context, and however much that context has been disrupted by the centuries since their excavation, it survives as documentation. We know from many of these objects where they were found, which room, which position, which house, which gives them a specificity, a particularity that most museum objects lack. They are not just beautiful objects. They are evidence of a specific life, in a specific place, on a specific morning. Fact 68. The eruption killed approximately 2,000 people in Pompeii, approximately 16 to 20% of the estimated population. This means that approximately 80 to 84% of the people of Pompeii survived. They escaped. In the first hours of the eruption, while the pumice fall was still manageable and the roads were still passable, they walked or rode away from the mountain. North, south, away. Some of them came back eventually to a changed landscape. A landscape in which their city no longer existed above the surface of the earth, where the farms they had left were covered in ash, where the familiar contours of the land were altered. They did not rebuild Pompeii, not because they couldn't, because the ash layer was deep enough, and the memory of what had happened recent enough, that the site was largely abandoned. The city was left to become what it is now, not because it was forgotten, because what it had been was too present in the memory of the people who had fled it, too recent, too real. Fact 69. The bodies at Pompeii were originally identified as victims of suffocation by ash. This was the understanding for most of the history of the excavation. People breathing in the ash cloud, dying slowly of asphyxiation. Modern forensic analysis of the skeletal remains has revised this. The posture of the bodies, the poses captured in the casts, is consistent with a specific phenomenon known as the pugilistic posture, the defensive boxer's pose. Arms raised, knees bent, hands in fists. The body assuming this position not because the person fought to survive, but because the extreme heat of the pyroclastic surge caused the muscles to contract and the body to assume this configuration after death. The muscles contracting, in the heat, into the posture of someone fighting. When the fighting was over, the bodies of Pompeii are not frozen in the positions of people dying slowly. They are frozen in the positions of people who were dead within seconds. Of heat, instantaneous, painless almost certainly. There was no slow suffocation, just the moment before, and then the preserved moment after. Fact 70. A 2018 discovery in the Regio V excavations found the remains of two men in what appears to have been a basement room. Their ages, approximately 40 and approximately 18. Their positions, one lying face down, one on his back. Their condition, partially carboniced, suggesting they had survived the initial pyroclastic surge but were caught in a subsequent one. One had a coin purse. One had traces of a woolen blanket. The older man had signs of bone disease in his spine, a condition that would have affected his mobility. The younger man's bone structure suggests he was physically fit. The speculation, and it is speculation, is that the older man, impeded by his condition, could not move quickly enough to escape, and that the younger man had stayed with him. They were found together, in the basement, in the dark, waiting for whatever came next. Together, in the basement, in the dark, the younger man who could have gone, staying, the older man who could not go quickly, not alone, the two of them, together, in the last place, the dark, the same dark, that every pair who has ever waited together has waited in. Not every dark is waiting for the surge. Most dark is just the dark, the ordinary dark, the night dark, the restful kind. the kind that comes after, and before, and holds, without threat, just holds. Sleep. The discovery of Pompeii is not over. This is the single most important thing about Pompeii that most people who have a general knowledge of the site do not fully appreciate. Not. Pompeii was discovered in 1748 and has since been studied. More. Pompeii was begun in 1748 and the beginning is ongoing. Every season of excavation in the newly opened Regio V area produces finds that make headlines. Every application of new technology to the existing record produces insights that were impossible before. Every generation of researchers asking new questions of the same material finds new things. The mountain pressed pause on August 24th, or October 17th, 79 AD. And the finding is still catching up. Still watching the footage. Still finding out what happened in the frames it has not yet reached. Fact 72. The Pompeii Archaeological Park now employs approximately 450 people directly and generates approximately 50 million euros in annual ticket revenue. The site receives approximately 3.5 million visitors per year, making it one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. Behind only, depending on the year, the Colosseum, the Uffizi Gallery, and a handful of other major Italian cultural sites. This scale of visitation creates an extraordinary conservation challenge. 3.5 million pairs of feet on ancient stone. 3.5 million cameras photographing ancient paint. 3.5 million exhaled breaths contributing moisture to the atmosphere inside roof structures. The conservation of Pompeii is, in a very real sense, a war being fought between the desire to share something extraordinary and the physics of what sharing it costs. The site will not last forever at this rate of visitation. Nobody knows quite how long it will last, but the deterioration is measurable. And the problem is one of the hardest in all of cultural heritage management. Fact 73. In 2021, archaeologists working in the Regio V excavations found the skeleton of a man in a remarkably well-preserved state. He was approximately 30 to 40 years old. His upper body had been crushed by a large stone block, approximately 300 kilograms, that had fallen or been propelled from a wall above during the eruption. The block had landed on his chest, not immediately killing him. The angle of the skeleton suggests he had been moving or crouching, not lying flat when the block hit, perhaps already weakened, perhaps already injured by the eruption's falling debris. He had not made it out. The stone still on his chest. After 2,000 years, the excavation photograph, the block, the bones, the angle of the body beneath, is one of the most powerful images from the entire Pompeii excavation. Not for its horror, for its specificity. One person, one moment, one consequence, kept. Fact 74. The inscriptions being discovered in the Regio V excavations are proving as valuable as the objects. In one house, a house whose owner appears to have been a blacksmith, based on the tools and equipment found, a small inscription was found on the wall of an entrance passage. It read in Latin, "Traveler beware. Traveler beware. Not beware of the dog. Not beware of anything specific. Just, traveler beware." An inscription directed at whoever passed through. A warning without a specified threat. The inscriber's private concern, put into words, put onto a wall. To survive the person who wrote it. By 2,000 years. Fact 75. New analytical techniques are allowing researchers to extract information from Pompeian material that was previously inaccessible. Residue analysis, the chemical examination of the residues left in ceramic vessels, is identifying the specific contents of containers that appear, visually, to be empty. Fish sauce, wine, olive oil, garum of specific types, from specific fish, from specific geographic regions. The supply chains of the Roman world, reconstructed from chemical traces in pots. Pollen analysis is identifying the plants in gardens. Isotope analysis of bones is identifying where individuals grew up. The chemical signature of the water and food of different regions, encoded in childhood bone growth, readable thousands of years later. The person from North Africa. The person from the Eastern Mediterranean. The person from the local Campanian region. All visible in the bone, in the chemistry of a city that stopped on one morning 2,000 years ago. The chemistry of the bone, saying where you grew up. The residue in the pot, saying what was in it. The pollen, saying what bloomed in the garden. All of it, in the material, waiting to be asked. Not by archaeologists in the ancient sense, but by chemists and physicists and molecular biologists, with instruments the ancient world could not have imagined, asking the same question. What happened here? Who was here? What did they have for dinner? Fact 76. The bones of enslaved people are present at Pompeii. The Roman economy was a slave economy. Approximately 30% of the population of Italy in the 1st century AD was enslaved. In Pompeii, as in every Roman city, enslaved people were everywhere. They worked in the baths. They worked in the bakeries. They worked in the fields. They were the labor force of the domestic economy. Cooking, cleaning, childcare, sexual service, and of the commercial economy. The skeletal remains do not, in themselves, identify enslavement, but certain skeletal markers, the evidence of specific types of repetitive physical work, of skeletal stress from heavy labor, of nutritional deficiencies more severe than those found in free populations, allow researchers to make probabilistic assessments. The people who lived the hardest lives in the hardest conditions, invisible largely in the textual record, present in the bones, in the chemistry of the work, in the body's record of what was asked of it. Fact 77. The fate of the survivors of Pompeii is not entirely unknown. Titus, the emperor at the time of the eruption, responded quickly and extensively to the disaster. He dispatched relief missions. He visited the region twice. He redirected revenues from the sale of estates left without heirs after the eruption, the estates of those who had died without surviving relatives, to fund relief and reconstruction in the affected area. He also commissioned surveys of the destroyed cities. The surveys are referred to in ancient sources. They do not survive, but the survivors of Pompeii, those who had made it out, were not simply abandoned. They received official assistance. They were resettled in surrounding communities. Some of them, presumably, carried their possessions, their memories, their specific knowledge of Pompeian addresses and building layouts and the contents of the houses they had left behind, into the towns and cities where they spent the rest of their lives, carrying Pompeii forward, in their heads, for as long as they lived. Fact 78. The town of Nuceria, east of Pompeii, safely out of the eruption's worst path, was one of the communities that received Pompeian refugees. The evidence comes not from ancient sources but from epigraphy. Inscriptions in Nuceria from the decades after 79 AD include names that are recognizably Pompeian. Family names, freedmen names, names from the programmata that covered the walls of the city that was now under the ash. The families resettled. The names continuing in a new town, in inscriptions that give only the barest outline of lives, but that confirm the people of Pompeii did not all die. Many of them went on and built lives in the shadow of the ash cloud that had covered their city, under a sky that, on clear days, would have shown them Vesuvius, on the horizon, still there. Fact 79. The eruption of 79 AD may have been preceded by a precursor event. Geological evidence, layers of volcanic material deposited before the main event, detected in cores drilled from the Bay of Naples, suggests there may have been a smaller eruption in the months or weeks before August or October 79 AD. If so, this would add to the picture of warnings that went unread. Not just the drying springs and the minor earthquakes. An actual eruption, perhaps small enough to be dismissed, perhaps large enough to notice, but not large enough or not correctly interpreted to trigger evacuation. The framework for understanding what Vesuvius was saying did not exist, even if the mountain was saying it clearly. The language of the mountain was not known, until the mountain spoke so loudly that no interpretation was needed. Fact 80. There are ancient settlements near Vesuvius that have not yet been found. This is not speculation. It is a certainty, based on the geographical distribution of the eruption's deposits and the ancient documentary record. Ancient sources mention settlements in the region around Vesuvius that cannot be identified with any known excavated site. The volcanic deposits of 79 AD cover a large area, and much of that area has never been systematically surveyed. The infrastructure of modern Italy, roads, railways, towns, industrial facilities, lies over the ancient landscape, under parts of the modern town of Torre Annunziata, under farmland, under the suburban sprawl of the Naples metropolitan area. There are Roman sites under living cities, unknown, unexcavated, waiting for the kind of accident that revealed Pompeii to begin with. A farmer's well, a builder's foundation, a shovel striking something that is not soil. The shovel that struck something that was not soil in 1748 was always going to strike something, eventually, because the something was there, waiting to be struck. Under any of 1,000 fields, under any of 1,000 shovels, on any of 1,000 ordinary days, the extraordinary thing was always just below the surface, as it is tonight, just below the surface of the ordinary, the day that was, now submerged, in the night, in the dark that keeps, in the preservation of the hours that were ordinary, while they were happening, and are now, simply, gone, kept, in the dark, in the way that every day is kept, by the night that follows it. Yours is being kept right now, all of it, the ordinary parts and the rest. Sleep. We are at the last section, the last 20 facts about the city that stopped. And in the way of all endings that are not really endings, because the excavation is not finished, because the scrolls are still being read, because the unexcavated third is still down there under its protective layer of volcanic rock, patient and intact and waiting for questions not yet formed. This is not really an ending. It is where we stop, not where the story stops. The story is still going. In the Regio V excavation trench right now there are people working. In the laboratory where the Herculaneum scrolls are being imaged right now there is a machine running. In the bones of the Pompeian dead, in the chemistry of the pots, in the root casts of the flowers in the garden, in the charcoal inscription that may have changed the date of the eruption, the city is still speaking, still giving, still being heard. Fact 81. The Pompeii Archaeological Park is governed by a body called the Grande Progetto Pompeii, the Pompeii Great Project, which shifted from emergency conservation in its first phase to a broader program of research, conservation, and visitor management. The director who has presided over its most recent transformation, Gabriel Zuchtriegel, appointed in 2021, has been explicit about the philosophy that guides the current program. Not just preservation, understanding, not just protecting the objects, understanding what the objects mean. what the city was like, who lived in it, what their lives contained, the archaeology as a form of listening to voices that are still speaking, if the question is asked correctly. Fact 82. The Herculaneum Conservation Project, a long-term partnership between the Packard Humanities Institute and the Italian Ministry of Culture, has been working since 2001 to systematically conserve and document the excavated areas of Herculaneum. Unlike Pompeii, where the sheer scale of the site makes comprehensive conservation an overwhelming challenge, Herculaneum is small enough that comprehensive, systematic, building-by-building conservation is possible. What this has revealed is the degree to which the earlier excavations of the 18th and 19th centuries, conducted by tunneling through the 20 meters of volcanic rock, extracting objects, and leaving the tunnels open or backfilled without documentation, had damaged the site. Modern conservation at Herculaneum is partly about undoing, or working around, the damage of 250 years of previous excavation, and partly about revealing what earlier excavators missed, because they were looking for objects, not for the building, not for the context, not for the full picture, which is still being assembled, piece by piece. Fact 83. In 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic, the Pompeii excavations made one of their most spectacular finds, a ceremonial bronze chariot, as we noted. But in the same excavation area, in the suburban district just outside the Porta Stabia, a thermopolium of extraordinary preservation. Not just the counter, the complete contents. The food in the dolia, duck, pig, goat, fish, snails, beef, analyzed by zooarchaeologists. The painted panels on the counter's facade, showing the food sold. And something else. On the floor behind the counter, the remains of a person, presumably the thermopolium's operator, or a customer, found exactly where they were when the surge came. A business, its owner, its last day of trading, all preserved, together. Fact 84. The children's rooms at Pompeii are among the most intimate spaces in the excavated city. In several houses, rooms that appear to have been children's spaces have been identified by the small-scale furniture, the miniature chairs, the child-sized beds, and by the objects found within them. Dolls, made of ivory, of bone, of terracotta, some articulated, with jointed limbs that could be posed. A small terracotta pig, clearly a toy. A set of knucklebones, the Roman equivalent of jacks, played with sheep's knuckle bones or small terracotta or metal replicas. The toys of Roman children, 2,000 years old, still recognizable, still in their basic forms and functions familiar. A child's doll, a child's pig, the specific shape of a childhood, in a specific time and place, that is simultaneously very far away and very close. Fact 85. The most recent major find at Pompeii at the time of this writing, announced in the autumn of 2023, was a room. Not an unusual room, in the sense of extraordinary decoration or spectacular objects. An ordinary room. A small room, probably belonging to enslaved workers in the household, in a house in the Regio 9 area. The room contained 2 wooden beds, preserved as Carboniste remains, their shapes visible though the wood itself was gone. A chamber pot, an oil lamp, the minimal furnishings of a minimal space, lived in by people who had no choice about where they lived, or under what conditions. The room is being described as the most important find in the most recent phase of excavation, not because of what it contains, because of what it says about whose lives are now being looked for. The field has changed. The questions have changed. The city still answering. The enslaved workers' room, the chamber pot, the 2 beds, the minimum, being looked at now. with the same care as the gold, the same care as the frescoes, the same care as the chariot, history expanding to include the people it left out, the people who were always there, doing the work, in the smallest rooms, who are finally being found. Fact 86. The Pompeii I Quadro, the four-room painted complex found in 2023 in the Regio 9 area, contains some of the most significant wall paintings discovered in decades. One room has painted mythological scenes, Helen of Troy being presented to Paris, Apollo and Cassandra, the Troy cycle, the same stories that were scratched onto walls by schoolchildren learning their Virgil, painted here by a professional artist, in a house wealthy enough to commission them, on walls that have been sealed under volcanic rock for nearly 2,000 years. The colors preserved, the figures still distinct, still telling the story of people who went to war over a woman, of a prophet nobody believed, of an entire civilization that fell, painted on the walls of a city that was itself about to fall, by someone who did not know. Fact 87. The ancient Roman understanding of what had happened to Pompeii settled, over the following century, into a kind of awed incomprehension. Pompeii was not forgotten. It was remembered as a lesson about the God's power over human arrangements, about the fragility of the works of human hands. The Roman poet Statius, writing approximately 20 years after the eruption, described the area around Vesuvius with an eerie elegiac quality. The vine-clad slopes where the vine no longer grew, the cities that were, the landscape that had been changed beyond recognition. He did not know, writing in the 90s AD, that the cities he was writing about were still largely intact under the ash. He thought they were simply gone. The preservation was invisible to those above it, as preservation usually is. Fact 88. The question of what Pompeii means, for history, for culture, for the way we understand the ancient world, has never been more actively debated than it is now. The city has been a lens for every generation that has studied it. The 18th century saw it as classical beauty, recovered. The 19th century saw it as a romance with the ancient past. The early 20th century saw it as evidence of Roman greatness. The late 20th century began to see it as evidence of Roman inequality, of the lives of the people who made that greatness possible. The 21st century is asking questions about gender, about slavery, about ethnicity, about the experience of people who left no literary record. The city is the same. The questions are different, and the city answers them all, because it preserved everything, without prejudice, without deciding in advance what would matter. It kept it all, the gold and the graffiti, the chariot and the chamber pot, the temple and the tavern, the senator's house and the enslaved worker's room, all of it, in the same dark, under the same mountain, for the same 2,000 years. Fact 89. Pompeii is UNESCO World Heritage listed. This designation, awarded in 1997, updated since to include Herculaneum and other sites in the area, recognizes that what is preserved at Pompeii is not the property of Italy alone. It is a heritage of all humanity, not because all of humanity has any specific cultural connection to Roman Campania, but because what it represents, the most complete picture of daily life in an ancient city, belongs to the accumulated understanding that humanity has of its own past. When Pompeii is conserved, all of us benefit. When Pompeii deteriorates, all of us lose something. The cave painting in France, the terracotta army in China, the temples of Angkor, these are all, in some fundamental sense, the same kind of thing. The record of what it was like to be here before now. Fact 90. The city of Stabii, where Pliny the Elder died, is one of the sites destroyed in 79 AD that has been least excavated. It is now under the modern town of Castellamare di Stabia, under streets, under buildings, under the infrastructure of a living city. It has been excavated in parts, intermittently, incompletely, over the course of 150 years, but most of it is unreachable. The ancient villas on the coastal promontory, where Pliny spent his last night, where Pomponianus watched the mountain from his windows, are under or adjacent to the modern town. The rooms where Pliny heard his friends' slaves snoring, where he asked to be helped down to the beach, are somewhere under Castellamare di Stabia, inaccessible for now, as so much is inaccessible for now. Fact 91. The Herculaneum Scrolls project has, as of 2024, produced fragments of multiple texts, not just Philodemus. New words, new sentences, new fragments. The identity of some of the new texts is not yet established. There is a real possibility, not a certainty, but a genuine, scientifically grounded possibility, that among the 1,800 scrolls still sealed in their storage cases, there are texts that exist nowhere else. Lost works of Aristotle, lost plays of Sophocles, lost histories, lost poetry. The list of what we know was lost, because other ancient writers quoted from or referred to works that no longer survive, is long. The possibility that some of those losses are recoverable, in a storage room in Naples, in sealed cylinders of Carboniste papyrus, is real, is being worked on, right now. Fact 92. The mountain, Vesuvius, is monitored continuously. The Vesuvius Observatory, founded in 1841 and now the oldest volcanological observatory in the world, maintains a network of sensors across the mountain and the surrounding region. Seismometers, GPS sensors measuring surface deformation, gas sensors measuring the composition and volume of emissions from the crater, tilt meters measuring the angle of the mountain's flanks. Every tremor, every gas emission, every millimeter of ground deformation, monitored, recorded, analyzed, not because an eruption is imminent, but because the one thing that the eruption of 79 AD taught us absolutely was that the mountain can erupt without any warning that the people around it can read. And so we have built the instruments to read what the people of Pompeii could not, the mountain's language. Fact 93. The unexcavated third of Pompeii is the subject of ongoing non-invasive surveys. Ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, magnetometry. These techniques allow researchers to detect buried structures without excavating them, to map, at least in outline, what is down there, and to prioritize which areas should be targeted when excavation resources are available. What the surveys have revealed is that the unexcavated third contains large structures, public buildings, a possible large bath complex, areas of dense occupation. The map is being drawn, before anyone goes down, by instruments that ask the ground questions, and the ground answers, in the language of resistance and magnetism and electrical current, as the ground always answers when asked correctly. Fact 94. There are people who have devoted their entire professional lives to one small part of Pompeii, one house, one neighborhood, one category of object, 40 years of studying the graffiti, a lifetime of studying the wall paintings, a career spent on the bones of one section of the site. The level of specialization required to understand Pompeii fully is such that no single person, and no single generation, will ever possess it. The understanding of Pompeii is collective, accumulated across disciplines and decades and languages and generations. It is built the way the city was built, gradually, by many hands, each one adding something, That was not there before. Fact 95. The children who will excavate the unexcavated third of Pompeii are alive right now. Some of them are in school. Some of them have not yet decided what they want to study. Some of them have not yet heard of Pompeii. But they will be the researchers and the archaeologists and the conservators and the technologists of the mid-21st century. They will have instruments that do not yet exist, methods that have not yet been invented, questions that have not yet been asked, and they will go down into the part of the city that has been waiting since August or October 24th, 79 AD. For exactly that. For them. For their questions. For their instruments. For the future's curiosity. Directed at the preserved past. Fact 96. The bread in the baker's oven, the one found in 1930, placed in the oven on the morning of the eruption and never removed, is now in the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. It is approximately 20 centimeters in diameter, circular, scored into 8 sections, carbon dark, but intact, still bread-shaped, still holding the impression of the hands that shaped it, the scoring made by a knife, the 8 sections for easy breaking and sharing, a loaf made to be shared by someone, with people, on a morning that turned out to be the last morning, but was not intended to be. It was just the morning, the ordinary morning, when you bake the bread, because it's time to bake the bread. Fact 97. The painted electoral notices on the walls of Pompeii, the programmata, include an unusual number that appear to have been painted during the eruption itself, or just before. The paint on some of them was still wet when the eruption began. Fresh paint. Campaigning for an election that would never happen. The candidate whose supporters were still painting his name on walls when the mountain erupted. We do not know who he was. We know the name was still going up. That someone believed in him. That someone thought the election would happen. That the city would continue. That the vote would be cast. That tomorrow would look enough like today to make the effort worthwhile. This optimism, this unremarkable faith in tomorrow, is in retrospect heartbreaking and ordinary, and the same faith that everyone has every time they plan for something that depends on tomorrow arriving. Fact 98. The last objects found in the Regio V excavations in 2022 included items from a room that appears to have been a shrine room, a small lararium, a household shrine, with figurines and ritual objects. Among the objects, a small bronze statuette of Alar, one of the household gods, in the standard pose. One arm raised, a drinking horn in the other hand. The Lar, in Roman domestic religion, was the protector of the household. The guardian, the thing you prayed to when you wanted the house to be safe, when you wanted the people in it to be well, when you wanted tomorrow to be all right. The small bronze guardian, found in the rubble of the house it did not protect, still, in its standard pose, still raised, still holding the drinking horn, still there. Fact 99. The city of Pompeii has been visited, in its excavated form, by more human beings than lived in it during its entire history. The 11,000 people of ancient Pompeii, the 3.5 million visitors per year for the approximately 275 years of excavation. The cumulative visitorship is in the hundreds of millions, every one of them standing in the streets, looking at the walls, reading the graffiti, looking at the casts, standing at the counter of the thermopolium, wearing smooth in their small way the already worn stones, adding their presence to the presence that has accumulated there. Since the morning the mountain ended one story, and began another. Fact 100. The last fact is this: the people of Pompeii were not remarkable. Not in the way that the word remarkable is usually used. Not exceptional, not extraordinary, not different in kind from the people who came before or after. They were Roman in the 1st century AD. They had the values, the habits, the language, the fears, the ambitions, the loves, the ordinary daily difficulties of their specific time and place. They were living the life available to them, in the conditions available to them, with the information available to them, which did not include any information about what the mountain was going to do. And because of what the mountain did, we know them more intimately in some ways than we know any other group of people from the ancient world. We know what they ate for lunch. We know what jokes they found funny. We know that some of them loved their dogs. We know that some of them were afraid of their neighbors. We know that they were having an election. We know that they still had wet paint on the walls. We know that a child was practicing Virgil on a plaster surface. We know that a baker put bread in an oven. And we know, because of where the bread is now, that he did not take it out. Not because the bread was sacred. Not because the baker was remarkable. But because that is what happened. On that morning, in that city, that the mountain decided to keep. The bread in the oven, the lard still raised, the wet paint on the wall, the child's letters on the plaster, the dog at the door, the 63 people in the room, the 2 men in the basement, the ring lady with her box, the election that didn't happen, the chariot in the garden, the cupids in the house of the Vetii, the word purple in a sealed scroll, Pliny the Elder with his notebooks, the mountain quiet tonight, the city under the ash, still, the unexcavated third, still waiting, still intact, still holding whatever it holds, in the patient, faithful, impartial dark, that keeps everything, without judgment, without preference, with complete fidelity, for as long as it is needed. You are kept right now, in the same dark, by the same faithful keeper, the night, which does not judge what it receives, which does not prefer one thing over another, which simply holds everything. You, tonight, the ordinary, the unremarkable, the specific, the irreplaceable, you, held, in the dark, until morning. Sleep.